Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Yelty, and I'm a member at Shiloh A.M.E. Zion Church. I also lead a virtual biotech accelerator. And the reason why I want to tell you that is because that gives me the opportunity, and I am blessed and fortunate to have the opportunity to collaborate with some of the smartest and brightest doctors and scientists I feel in the country. And we're fortunate that we have three of them joining us tonight. So while we're here, I was on a Zoom call with my church, Shiloh, recently, and I asked the question of, are you excited about finally having a vaccine? And are you looking forward to taking the vaccine? And I got silence. I got silence on the phone. So then I followed up with DeQuincy, who's one of our leaders in our church, and he informed me that a lot of the church members were concerned about taking the virus. So at that point in time, I said, I need to share my network or my knowledge that I have access to with the church and the community. So then DeQuincy and I approached the pastor. And if you know Reverend Givens, once we approached him with the idea, there was no turn back. So we are here today to not advise you or try to advise you on exactly to take the virus or not. I've been very fortunate that my panel members, we're going to educate you on the vaccine and the surrounding. We got a set of questions that we're going to answer. And based on that, we hope that we empower you to make an informed decision for yourself. Now, before I introduce the panelists and allow the panelists to introduce themselves, one of our members of our church and a personal friend of mine is going to share give you some remarks and share his reason for taking the virus. Walter, could you?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Walter Nealy. I'm a member of the Shiloh A.M.E. Zion Church, and I, on December 22nd, lost my wife to COVID-19. She was a faithful member of our church community, and she was very careful and very cautious in this time of COVID. But the week of Thanksgiving, she became ill. We thought she was having a stroke. We took her to the hospital. A stroke was ruled out. And then it was discovered that she had COVID. They began therapy. It looked as though she was turning around. In fact, the Sunday after the Tuesday that she was admitted to the hospital, she was discharged and she was home. Then her oxygen levels started to decline and she was readmitted to the hospital. And we went through a 2-week odyssey of her condition seeming to get better, then worsening, and then finally we lost her on the 22nd of December. So I think that if she had been a candidate for the vaccine, she may be here today. So I know there are people who are reluctant or concerned about the vaccine, but I think that all things considered, you should consider taking the vaccine, taking the therapy. And I think we'll learn something tonight about the science, about the efficacy of this therapy. So that's my little comment about the situation. If that's helpful, I appreciate it. And I pray that I will learn something tonight about this whole pandemic and about hopefully what is going to be a solution.
Great. Thank you, Walter, for sharing with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves, Eric, Karen, and Owen. I cannot thank them when I approached them about helping me to bring this to the community. All of them just jumped in and agreed to it immediately. So again, always ladies first. So Karen, why don't you introduce yourself and tell the group a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. And again, thank you, Brother Walter, for providing your story. I am so sorry for your loss. My name is Karen Correa. I have been in the industry for approximately 29 years. I have my bachelor's, my master's, and my PhD basically focused all on clinical research and drug development. I have been doing drug development for the 29 years of my span. I have worked across all types of therapeutic areas, and I have seen the opportunity for multiple drugs to get to the market under my watch. I am currently the Vice President of Global Clinical Operations at Takeda Pharmaceuticals, and I oversee a team of about 160 people, and we work on about 200 different drugs. We do not work on the COVID vaccine, but we do work on convalescent treatment with plasma-derived therapies for treatment of COVID. So I just wanted to let everyone know that and disclose that as well. Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Okay, Eric.
Good evening, and again, thank you for inviting me to your homes. My name is Eric Mortensen. I'm a gastroenterologist by training. My PhD is in biophysics, which really translates into studying how proteins affect change in cells and in your body. I've been in the industry for, at this point now, more than 25 years. And for transparency, I've worked at Merck. I previously was the Vice President and Head of Inflammation and Immunology at Pfizer, which obviously is the manufacturer of one of the vaccines. And I'm currently the Head of GI Clinical Development at Janssen, which is the manufacturer of another one of the potentially coming vaccines. I also happen to be one of the guinea pigs in one of the clinical trials for the Janssen vaccine. I don't know whether I'm a placebo or an active patient, but I literally have skin in the game. So just want to put that out there as well. So.
And I would love to add this comment when we were talking the other night, because I've had this question come about when they asked me, should I wait for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine to come up because it's a one dose? And Eric even said he's not going to wait. So I wanted to add that.
You grab what you can get when you can get it.
That's exactly. Owen.
Well, thank you for having me. Owen, by, can you hear me? You hear me now?
Yes.
Beautiful. So Owen Garrick, I'm CEO of Bridge Clinical Research, a physician by training. I've been doing research for, been at Bridge doing research for about 14, 15 years, and we manage clinical trials for drug companies. And our mission is to increase diversity in clinical trials. So we believe in the importance of people of color participating in research. And it's a pretty simple thing. If we're not part of the research, we don't quite know for sure if these things work in us. So here we believe that that does lead to some degree what we're seeing in terms of health disparities. And I am also on the board of the New York Blood Center. And the Blood Center isn't, is involved in vaccine research, but in particular has done a lot of work in, to what Karen alluded, in convalescent plasma. So basically, if you are sick with COVID and you recover, you have a lot of the antibodies, so you can donate those antibodies and give them to other people who might get sick to help them recover faster. We have not done any work in any of the vaccine trials, but we did some work last year with a company, Genentech, where we helped them with a COVID pneumonia study. So using a drug that they had for rheumatoid arthritis, because that was involved in inflammation, and there was an issue of inflammation in the lungs causing a lot of the distress. So we did a study with them there. That's my background. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Okay. So now we're going to go into answering questions that we received before the call. And we're going to leave some time on the back end to actually answer any questions, and you can submit your questions through the chat as you go along. So questions will come up as you hear the answers to some of the questions that we received before the call. And we broke the question down into 3 separate groups in order to group the questions. And the first group is understanding the development and the research. And Karen's going to start off again and answer those questions in that group.
Awesome. So I'm just going to give a little bit of history. I think a lot of people have received information on the news and are seeing things. So I just kind of want to just touch base on that just to set the stage of the conversation. So currently right now, there are 2 approved vaccines for COVID, one that is by Pfizer and then one that is by Moderna. It's important to understand the difference in reference to getting the dose. I think that was one of the questions. First off, both of the vaccines are in 2 doses. Pfizer's dose is 21 days apart or 3 weeks, and Moderna's is 28 days apart or 4 weeks. Someone asked, well, what happens if I miss my second dose and it's not at that time frame? Can I still get it, or do I need to restart? First off, the FDA CDC does not recommend you restart, but they do say that you can get the second dose anytime between 4 to 6 weeks after the first dose. Believe it or not, it still continues to work. The difference in the first dose and the second dose is the effectiveness. So the effectiveness increases from the first dose to the second dose by percentages. And so the first dose for Pfizer's is at 52%. So if you get the first dose, you're like 52% effective. If you get the second dose, then you become 95% effective. Moderna is the same thing. It's like the second dose, we are now at 94% effective. So that's just to answer that question. The next question someone asked me was, which vaccine do you feel is the most effective? As Eric said earlier, I would feel both of them are effective. And if you have the opportunity to get a dose and get vaccinated, that would be my choice for me. I also want to mention that because of the how it's being allocated or provided to each facility, I am actually, just to give some transparency here, is I'm also on the board of a federally qualified health center. We get what is provided to us by the government. So it's not like you have a choice unless you wait and see what vaccine they have. So it's more of a kind of, you take the dose that they have, and if they have Pfizer, then you would get that. And if they have Moderna, then you would get that. So that was a question asked about that. The next thing that was asked was, what precautions are taken to make sure that the vaccine is handled safely during travel to the facility? I know there's a lot of concern in the news about the temperatures controls, because the drugs have to be at certain temperatures. I just want to mention, this is where my experience comes in. We have done this for all vaccine trials and all other trials that we do. We have a lot of other trials that we call cold chain transfers. And so we focus on that, and we have so many chain of custodies that are in place to make sure that when drug goes from one facility to the other facility, that we maintain the temperatures. And then the facilities that it get to, that they're able to keep that dose at the same temperature as well before it is administered. So all of these health facilities and all of the places that are administering have already been trained on this processes. They utilize this for other types of drugs as well. This vaccine is no different than some other drugs that have these type of temperature controls. And so we're very experienced in temperature excursions, or going outside of the temperatures that we see for, or we expecting for that drug. So that's very important to write out as well. One of the questions people ask is about this word herd immunity. Well, the World Health Organization has said that there's not a true understanding of how many people need to be vaccinated to have true herd immunity. The ultimate goal is to try to get everyone vaccinated so that we can control the vaccine. When you get vaccinated, it does not mean you cannot get get a COVID. What it does, the goal is to minimize the severity of you getting it and this opportunity for you to transmit it to someone else. So even though you get vaccinated, that does not mean that we will go to back to the life in reference to, okay, now I don't wear my mask anymore. I don't do the social distancing. Those practices should still be kept in place even after getting vaccinated. Some of the other questions was asked about was how many people got the vaccination in reference to African Americans. That is a very good question. As you might know or might have heard, Pfizer and Moderna had over 75,000 people that participated in the trials. And within the African American community, it was about 6,000. Now, Eric and Owen and I could probably attest, that's a lot. We've seen trials that have never had these types of numbers. So right now, I'm just gonna say in my 29 years, this is record numbers. And so this allows me some positivity just to give some experience. My PhD dissertation is on diversity in clinical trials. So I understand what numbers we've had in the past. So I think that's really informing information and it helps us as well. Let's see if I hit all of the questions that I had. I think I did, and I'm sure there's going to be more that comes up in the chat. So I'm going to now hand it over to Eric.
Thanks a lot, Karen. Okay, so the question that I had spoke really more to what is the vaccine, how does it work, and what are the other things that might potentially be effective in decreasing your risk of infection with the virus. Now, any of you who might be involved in the health sciences, I am not going to try to give a lecture tonight on how to make a DNA vaccine or an RNA vaccine. So I'm going to oversimplify some things. So forgive me if you end up hearing some things that sound like that seemed kind of dumbed down. I'm just trying to get a basic understanding of things across. So what is an mRNA vaccine? This is going to be the shortest description of what DNA and RNA is probably in history. DNA is the information that we have in each of our cells that tells us how to build our bodies. Probably most of you are familiar that DNA is that double helix. It's basically two long strands of a chain of molecules. And it's designed in a 4-letter code that if you end up using either mechanical tools or the tools within inside your cells, we can read off each of those letters, and by reading them off, you can then design what's going to be made in your body. DNA, as I said, is 2 chains together. Those 2 chains make it very stable. Stable for heat sensitivity, stable over a long time. I mentioned that, so I'm going to then contrast that with RNA. In your body, when you need to end up making a protein, that long chain is then translated by the machinery within your body into mRNA. Don't worry about the different splice D1R. Let's just go with the fact that that's a single chain. That single chain is now the message, mRNA, for messenger RNA, that your body then sends out to the machinery in your cells to then make protein. But that mRNA is very unstable. It's actually even hard in the laboratory for us to isolate it and be able to measure it. So that's going to be relevant to what the problems you then have with an mRNA vaccine. The problem is we have viruses. There are DNA viruses and RNA viruses. Let's not bother talking about the DNA viruses. Focus on the RNA viruses. These are viruses that are very sneaky. They basically can sneak in and put in a strand of that mRNA that your body will confuse as a legitimate message. And that virus basically hijacks your body's ability to make a protein. And the virus basically gets you to do its work for it. Now, one important aspect of this is that that's a very inefficient, inaccurate process. We're going to talk, I'm mentioning this because of the question about the new strains. When we say those new strains basically represent errors that normally happen in the virus process. The virus doesn't care that it's inaccurate. The virus doesn't care it's inefficient. It's basically the guy that goes to the casino and he's playing with house money. So the virus is very happy to have a very inaccurate process because If most of those viruses, those strands don't work, what does it care? The ones that do work go on to make more virus. And sometimes one of those mutations results in a virus that might be a little bit better about being able to infect, maybe a little bit better about being able to kill in one way or another. That's what we're talking about, is those strains. So what is an mRNA vaccine? Rather than doing an old-fashioned vaccine, which, by the way, that's kind of what Janssen's gonna be doing. We're doing the old-fashioned garden variety, grow the virus, spin it down, heat it up to kill it, treat it with chemicals to kill it, and then inject it into you, kind of like your measles vaccine, like your smallpox vaccine. Pfizer and the Moderna decided to use a technique that is not brand new. It's just very hard to do, to end up making that message, not a protein by spitting down the virus, making the actual message, packaging it very carefully, keeping it really cold, and then injecting it into you. And the beauty of it is that it works similar to what the virus is doing, in that you're basically getting your body to now make those proteins that your body then responds to as part of the immune process. But here's the important point. You don't have a virus in you. You're not somehow going to be at risk for having a live virus that can take over your body. This is a very controlled process. So these vaccines do not incorporate into your DNA. They're not going to change you. You don't have to worry about some kind of mutation going on, because that's one of the questions people have. But as I just mentioned, it's expensive and requires a lot of, as Karen said, cold chain activity. And that's frankly the reason why, although we've made these vaccines before, this is not the first time we've had an mRNA vaccine. We've done it for rabies. We've done it for SARS. They even did it for, I looked it up this morning and I then forgot it. It's been done before, but it's so expensive and cumbersome, we just haven't generally distributed these. So I don't want you to think this is something entirely brand new. So now the next question then comes up, well, is this vaccine going to work against potential other COVID and SARS mutations? Well, if you say that broadly, I say it depends, because we haven't characterized each and every one. We know that the one that showed up in England, the vaccine seems to work very well against it, because all this vaccine is doing is it's getting your body to recognize that cap protein, the outside of the virus that latches onto your cells. And the one that comes up in England seems to be very well recognized by the vaccine. The strain that came out of South Africa, that one seems to be a little bit less well recognized, but they think that it's recognized enough so it should still protect you who gets the vaccine. But to Karen's point, you can still potentially be a spreader of virus, even if you're vaccinated. The vaccine, when we say it's working, is protecting you from getting sick. It may be a little bit less effective in preventing you from shedding virus onto other people from the South African virus. Will it work against all other future mutations? When you end up asking me about the future, that's a big question. At some point, we expect there probably will be some of those mutations I talked about that may not be recognized by this vaccine. Guess what? Pfizer and Moderna, they're already they're reading through these new viruses. They're seeing where the mutations are, and both Moderna and Pfizer already have a new booster shot that, should we find a problem, and we haven't found a problem yet, but should we find a problem, that they already have boosters that are designed against those new viruses. It's been said that taking vitamin C, D, E, A, iron, and zinc might be able to protect you against the virus. Can you speak to that? So with all questions about vitamins, I think at times we confuse what puts you at risk versus what helps you. The data is very clear that if you happen to have a zinc deficiency, a vitamin C deficiency, a vitamin D deficiency, you're at increased risk for viruses in general and probably much at risk more for the COVID virus as well. Now, being people of color, we particularly have to worry about being vitamin D deficient. Without going into a long story, vitamin D is made in your skin. Our skin color protects us when you're down by the equator against skin cancers, but it does mean that when we're living up here in northern climates, that we don't make as much vitamin D as we would if we were outside. And if you've been sitting in quarantine for a year, we're making even less vitamin D than we normally would. So you want to make sure, whatever color you are, that you have a good diet, and maybe you're taking a multivitamin so that you're normal. That's a big difference from saying whether or not taking these agents, zinc, vitamin D, and vitamin C, taking extra amounts of them. There's really not any great data showing that taking extra protects you, but you don't want to be deficient. And particularly since vitamin D is associated with diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease, we want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves with a good diet and or taking vitamin supplements. Well, African Americans, why are we disproportionately affected by the coronavirus? That's a big topic. I'm only going to touch on it very briefly because books have been written about these issues of disease susceptibility. Let me just speak to the elephant in the room. Is there something about being a Black person that makes you more at risk for the virus to infect you? That's not a foolish question. That's a very legitimate question to ask, because there are a lot of diseases where people of color do have some differences. As a Black man, I'm more susceptible to prostate cancer. Black women, we may be a little bit less susceptible to breast cancer of some types than women from Europe. So there are differences in some populations about some diseases. Short answer, they've looked for this with COVID, and as far as we can tell right now, Black people, people of color, we are not more susceptible to infection with the COVID virus. However, if you happen to be a person of color and you're in a job that puts you more at risk for being exposed in one of these essential worker jobs, you might be more at risk for being exposed than someone who can stay home. If you're someone who has less access to healthcare, because our community in general has had jobs that don't give us as many options in terms of insurance as the majority population, you might have more concern about spending money to go see a physician, so maybe you're getting less good healthcare. We know that we have increased risk for renal disease in our community, increased risk of obesity, and increased risk of diabetes. All those are diseases that we know, whatever color you are, puts you at greater risk for COVID. And we also know that when we, sadly, when we've looked at studies about going to hospitals, I can't deny the fact that every study does come back that on average, not for every individual, but as a population, we've seen that we don't necessarily get listened to as much in hospitals when there's a need for healthcare. So there are many factors that might be weighing in on why we're seeing a greater impact on people of color than the general population. What that just says to me basically is that we have to therefore make sure that we take as good care of ourselves as we possibly can, and that, be it trying to isolate ourselves from exposure, making sure that we're wearing masks, making sure that you're following all the guidelines, all those things. That's the way I'm approaching it. I'm not worrying about, I'm not going to get myself angry about the problems we have out there. I'm going to make sure I take care of myself and my family. Long-term effects from either the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccines. As scientists, we always sound wishy-washy because we never want to give you an absolute answer if we don't have all the data. But the short answer is that vaccines in general have been tested on populations over the years, not these vaccines, but vaccines have been tested on pregnant women. The ACOG guidelines talk about the fact that vaccines very similar to these vaccines have been given to pregnant women. We've tested them on populations over the years, and we have not seen long-term effects. Most vaccines have most of their negative effects in the first 3 days or in the first month or two. I mean, so things like your arm gets sore. Maybe you feel kind of tired and kind of sickish. Good friend of mine who's a midwife, because she's a frontline worker, she got the Moderna vaccine, and when she got the booster, yeah, for a day she actually had the sweats and she had a little bit of a headache and she felt kind of crampy, and she was so happy because it meant to her that basically she now knew that she was vaccinated. So that's what we tend to look at in terms of effects. And then the final question that I had here, so long-term effects. Again, I'm going to be very careful about making absolute statements because I can't tell you what's going to happen in 10 years without waiting for 10 years. But we've studied vaccines just like this, and we really haven't seen long-term negative effects. Vaccines are considered the modern miracle of the 20th century. They basically they're generally very effective, very safe, and we really haven't seen long-term problems with vaccines of this type. We can't tell exactly what we're going to get to herd immunity. I just reviewed an article today saying maybe 60%, maybe 70%. But as Karen said to you, even when the guy next to you has immunity from the vaccine, he can potentially still spread it to you. So you still got to make sure you're taking care of yourself no matter what happens. So I'm going to stop there and then turn things over to Owen.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you much. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Well, first, when Karen says she's been doing this for 29 years, she started when she was 1, but right the day after. She either got bit by a vampire and hasn't aged, or she's just looking good. They say black doesn't crack, so I guess that's true. So the segment I'm gonna go over questions around what things should I consider when I decide to get the vaccine. And the first question is, how much is this thing gonna cost me, right? And so there is a cost. The real question, I suppose, there is what is the cost to me, right? So if you look at these vaccines, per dose, they will cost on average $20 per dose. Now, what you pay is going to be different than that. So the US government, and I'm going to assume that this is probably not the biggest pro-Trump group in the world, but during his presidency, the one thing he did do was make sure that the vaccines for American citizens, there would not be a cost for the actual vaccine. Now, that's the actual 2 sets of injections. So if you have insurance, most likely your insurance will pick up the tab. If you don't have insurance, part of the Department of Health and Human Services, there's a fund set aside to pay for those who do not have insurance. Now, that's the cost of the actual vaccine. There is, though, a cost for another cost, what they call it administrative cost. So you're paying the doctor, nurse, phlebotomist, EMT, someone there who needs to get paid to inject, to actually do the injection, right? So there's going to be a cost for that. Same thing, though. If you have insurance, your insurance will should pick up that cost. And if you are uninsured, the same fund in the Department of Health and Human Services will pay for that. And that's sort of how it should work. And the law is such that you will not be prevented from getting a vaccine if you cannot pay for it. But I don't have to tell this group that the law doesn't always work for us the way it's supposed to. All right, but that is how it should happen. The next set of questions I have are there people that should not take the vaccine? And some of the examples are cancer patients. Eric talked about pregnant women. You have the question about individuals with lupus, and maybe also individuals that have had Guillain-Barré syndrome or diabetics in the past. And I'll try to go through a few of these. So the big questions generally about whether or not you should take the vaccine is about managing risk, right? So do I have a condition that is more risky if I just try to live with that condition compared to the risk of getting infected with COVID, right? And so the questions around that deal with Am I immunocompromised? So does my immune system work as well? Right. So here's the thing with being immunocompromised, and you see this with patients that are have cancer, have chronic kidney disease, have HIV, have lupus, have issues with the immune system. So if you have issues with your immune system, you are at more risk from an infection, right? And also, if you have issues with your immune system, you're at more risk of not developing or producing a strong enough immune response, right? So those are the two things you have to think through. Now, with cancer patients, it's interesting. The American College or the American Society of Clinical Oncology, one of the cancer societies in the US, is recommending and agreeing with the CDC, saying that there's no reason that cancer patients should not get the vaccine, just like anyone else. Now, there are what we call contraindications, reasons why you shouldn't get the vaccine, i.e. you're allergic to things in the vaccine. Then if you have cancer, you don't have cancer, you should not get it. So that they feel it's pretty much the same. Interestingly, the American Cancer Society says basically the same thing, just not as strongly, right? They just don't come with a definitive perspective. And you'll see this in fact, you've seen this all the time. You have different groups having slightly different opinions. So when it comes to pregnant women, and Eric mentioned that the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology says pregnant women, there's not enough data to say that pregnant women should or should not. So we think pregnant women should. The World Health Organization just came out today saying there's not enough information to decide whether or not pregnant women should or should not. So we think they shouldn't. Right? So same data, two respected organizations, and one saying yes, and one is saying no. So what do you do? Right? And that gets back to how do you this is a balance, right? So the same, they're establishing the same facts. We don't have enough information. One group is saying, then you shouldn't do it. Another group is saying there's no reason not to, right? So it can be confusing. So you have similar things with the similarly with individuals with lupus and Guillain-Barré syndrome. Now, the issue with vaccines, and Eric touched on this, if you're immunocompromised and have issues with your immune system, you should stay away from live vaccines. The mRNA vaccines are not live vaccines, so that should not be an issue for you. Right. So with flu vaccine, you should probably take what we call the inactivated vaccine if you have immune issues versus the nasal flu, because that is live vaccine. All right. Hopefully that was clear. So the next set of questions, what are the chances of being infected after I've received both doses of the vaccine? And then a follow-up question to that is, what are the chances of being reinfected after I've, one, recovered from the virus, and then two, I also get the vaccine? Now, the chances of being reinfected if you recovered from the virus and got the vaccines is probably pretty low, at least for a certain amount of time. We don't know how whether or not the vaccine is going to be like flu, where you should get it every year, or tetanus, where you get a booster every 10 years, or like measles, mumps, and rubella. Once you're a kid, you get them infected, you get the vaccine, and you're good for life. We just don't, there hasn't been enough time to really know that. So if the COVID vaccines don't protect for life, as the more time that goes on, you will have more increased risk of being infected. And the other thing is, you hear these numbers, 95% effective. I have a challenge with that. So that is technically correct. That is technically a true statement. But now, what most of us think, at least what I think when I hear that is, well, I'm gonna go out, have my, do my normal life, go on the subway, go to baseball games, cough and sneeze on folks, go to barbecues, picnics, you name it. And 95% of the time, I'm gonna be good. It may not be saying that because we haven't been at baseball and basketball games, on the subway, on the train, at the barbecue, coughing and sneezing and carrying on. We haven't been doing that. So it is not clear whether, so from a laboratory perspective, from a research in terms of the clinical trial, yes, that is what was shown to occur. And this is the other caveat. If you look at the Pfizer, and I know the Pfizer data more clearly, they looked at, when they calculated those numbers, it was symptomatic individuals. And as we all know, most, I don't know if most, but a large percentage of individuals that get the virus are not symptomatic. So more than likely, many people in those vaccine trials had infection. They were just not symptomatic. So they were not part of that calculation to get the 95%. That said, more than likely, those numbers, should hold up. But they should, when I say hold up, they'll hold up in that clinical, in that research setting. In the real world setting, we just don't know, because we're not, like I said, going to the Super Bowl. We're not hanging out, well, we shouldn't be, I should say. Depending on where you live, the Northeast, my friends that live in South Carolina and Texas, they're doing a lot more hanging out than I'm doing here in California. All right. So that is hopefully a good perspective on the risk. But even when you do get, so let's say the 95% numbers hold up, a few things. One, if you're in that 5% number, you're unlucky, right? And then two, it's going to take time for your body to create that immune response. So you can get the flu shot and get the flu, and people think, oh, the reason I got the flu is because I got the flu shot. Part of the reason, and the answer is no, because in most flu vaccines, you don't have the flu. You got the flu because, one, you were in that 5+% group that would get it. And two, you got it the next day, and it's going to take your body about 2 weeks to develop a good response. So it's the same thing with COVID. Then the next question is, should I consult my physician before taking the vaccine? I think generally yes. There are some people that say you shouldn't, because they don't want that to be, it's not like your doctor. You can call Eric's a doctor, Karen's a PhD. We can call our doctor right now and get an answer, right? But for most folks, you're gonna have to get an appointment, and that's gonna take some time. So there is public health officials will say, you don't necessarily need to wait if that's going to create an issue with access. I think the question is, should I talk to my doctor and get some feedback? And probably yes. I would say yes. But your doctor's going to have the same information we have, and it's not going to be crystal clear, right? So he or she should give you, based on what he or she knows about you specifically, a good recommendation based on understanding you, your risk, and everything else. And then the final question is, if I had the virus, should I still take the vaccine? And the recommendation is yes. I would say probably. My sense is taking the vaccine after being infected with the virus isn't going to hurt you. Isn't going to hurt you any more or less than whether or not you didn't have the virus before. So I would say, yeah, probably you should probably be fine. And the issue there is there's a question as to how long what we call natural immunity lasts. So if I get the virus, how long am I protected? Same question we don't know in terms of the vaccine, because it just literally takes time. You can't say this is good for 5 years if 5 years hasn't happened, right? I mean, you can say that, it just may not be true, right? Because you got to wait 5 years to make sure it is in fact the case. So those, I think, are the group of questions that I had. And Steve, I will hand it back over to you to continue your wonderful moderation duties.
As long as I don't have to answer any questions, I will do the moderation and administration. Speaking of moderation and administration, I'm very fortunate to have Aaliyah, who's back in the background somewhere. We can't see her. And she has been organizing the questions. And Aaliyah, how we're going to do this, you're just going to bring up a question at a time and then have the panel members fight over it. Who's going to answer it?
Yeah, I'll read the question.
Okay. I think you're on mute, Leah. You're going to read the first question?
Yeah. The first question is, once the vaccine is taken, what types of reactions will it have against other medications, especially metformin, which is a high blood pressure medicine?
I'll take a cut and so metformin is used for diabetes. I don't know of it being used for hypertension, but it's a what we call a first line type 2 diabetes medication. And first line meaning that's the first thing you probably take. There's no indication that the vaccine impacts metformin at all. Yes, I'm pretty sure. I think metformin is a common enough drug that there are more than likely enough individuals within the study and also in the 6 million or so individuals that have taken the vaccine so far that we would have heard something. So metformin is probably you're probably good with your metformin.
Thank you. It is the diabetes medicine that I'm taking, but at the same time, I'm taking simvastatin for the high blood.
Got it. Similar, same answer with simvastatin. You know, those are very common medications.
Thank you very much.
Next question is, does it matter what brand you get on your second dose? For example, if you get Pfizer as the first dose and Moderna as the second dose?
So yes, I think I put a response in the chat, and the answer is whatever your first dose was, I would get it as my second dose.
Right.
There's
Because
no
there's no
information to know, right?
Yeah. There's no data of crossing over from one manufacturer to the other. And so just because the whole process and the data, there would be nothing to be able to provide that. So I'm sure your healthcare provider, wherever you get it, would be assuring that you get the second dose of the first manufacturer.
Now, so let's say, and I think I'm going to surmise that question, we clearly have vaccine shortages.
We do.
Right? So this could be a real thing, right? That you take the Moderna vaccine first, and by the time in the 3 weeks, or is Moderna 3 weeks or 4 weeks? Like
Moderna's 4.
Okay,
Yeah,
so in
I was just
4
3.
weeks, right? 4 weeks, you go back to your physician or healthcare facility, they're like, yeah, we don't have any more. That could happen. So that's the real question. And I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
I'll give a little bit of guidance of what's been given to some of the healthcare facilities in New Jersey. Well, the ones that I'm on the board of, we've been given guidance that if the patient does not return we're supposed to be holding their second dose. If the patient does not return for their second dose, that we are supposed to notify them to return to get their second dose. After some time, there has been some documentation that we said, now we can now give that dose their second dose to someone else. So I can say our facility, all of our patients have returned or are returning within that time frame. But that has been given out there. But I know that right now we only have one type of manufacturer at our 10 facilities.
The other thing that I saw, I think yesterday or today, is that they want to remind people that it's not that suddenly you lose effect if you miss it on day 21 or day 28. There's a window. So if there happens to be a shortage, the expectation is that shortages will be corrected in a relatively good time. So I don't have the exact number offhand, but I was looking today and they were saying, bear in mind that you can go out even a couple more weeks, but try to get it on time and make sure you get the one that you had.
Absolutely, right. That is correct.
We're going on to the next question. Will the virus and or the vaccine make it difficult for your own immune system to fight other diseases?
I've done some vaccine studies. The usual recommendation is that you don't want to end up getting a vaccination within 2 weeks of another vaccine because your body is ramping up a strong cellular response against that one vaccine, but it's not as though this is preventing you from being able to respond to other things you might see. We get exposed to bacteria and viruses every day. The largest immune organ in your body is your GI tract, because you're being exposed to everything that goes in your mouth. And so you're seeing new antigens new things that you might be infected by every single day. But for vaccines, they want to make sure that you have a pristine period of 2 weeks around it.
Right. And in terms of relation to, so here's the deal. What kills you with COVID is the lungs, right? That's what kills you. And I'm not trying to be morbid here, right? So you have this, and when I say you have this infection or this response in the lungs, this inflammatory thing, it's hard to breathe, you're on the vent. So it is the other stuff, the muscle pain. I mean, yeah, listen, I like my grandmother's food. So yeah, the loss of taste isn't gonna kill me. It's gonna piss me off, right? But that's not gonna kill me. The stuff that kills you is the lung response to getting on the vent and having trouble breathing. That's not to say, and so we don't exactly, so yeah, if your body's fighting that, you're probably going to have some challenges, but those are going to be the least of your challenges. Really figuring out how to breathe better and managing that is going to be what is going to be the most important.
All right, just a reminder that if anyone has a question, please type it into the chat and we will ask the question for you. The next question is, what happens if you get COVID and you're already pregnant?
So I was reading the ACOG guidelines yesterday. If you are a pregnant woman, well, on an average basis, you'll have the same result that the average person in general has. Most people get a flu-like symptom, and they do well. The problem is that for that 5 to 15%, depending on where you are in that population, that don't do as well. The reason why the American College of Oncology and Gastroenterology recommended vaccinating was that they found that pregnant women with COVID tended to have a more severe course than non-pregnant women. So they recommended that you should actually think about getting the vaccine. If you get the virus and you haven't been vaccinated, don't worry. Speak to your doctor, make sure you're getting good management. Odds are that 85% of people have, typical flu-like symptoms, but you do want to speak to your doctor and make sure you're getting care.
Yeah, I think one, congratulations, you're having a baby. That's a good thing. The real question, so you would be treated just like Eric is saying, just like anyone else that is infected with COVID, and obviously it's going to be much more stressful, right? Because you're thinking it's not just my health, but my unborn child. I want to make sure that little Johnny or little Jane is going to be okay. As I go through my pregnancy, so it'd be super important to have regular interactions with your OB as well as your primary care physician.
Next question is, how is it possible to have COVID without any symptoms?
Who wants it? Same way. If you're in the household, I'm sure you've had experiences in the past where one person gets a cold and they're much sicker than everybody else. Any of us who've been parents, that the little vectors of infection that we actually give birth to our children, they seem to run around often basically looking just fine, and then they make us sick, and then we're in bed for a couple of days. So there are markedly different responses between individuals, and we don't truly understand all the factors for that.
Next question is, which vaccine do you guys believe is more effective, the Pfizer or the Moderna?
The one closest to you. Because the only one that works is the one that you can get. Now, and I will not, I have to be very careful. I am not going to end up proselytizing for a vaccine that has not been reviewed by the FDA yet and find myself in deep trouble with both my company and the FDA. I will just say that the reason why Janssen decided to make the particular vaccine that we have is that I think the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine are working beautifully. I mean, they're gorgeous vaccines, but you've seen that they require very severe conditions of storage. And we've had instances where 900 samples have been lost because they've spoiled, they come out of the fridge. The hope is the Janssen vaccine has not been reviewed yet. Results are supposed to be due next week out. It's designed to be able to be stable, just putting it next to the carton of milk in your refrigerator. So if it works, our intention was to have the vaccine for the rest of us, for Africa, for South America, a vaccine that can be distributed without all the expense of storage, but it has not been reviewed yet. And so therefore this has not been an advertisement for the Janssen vaccine.
Next
Yeah, my
question is,
sense is
oh, go
no,
ahead.
there's no major difference between the Moderna and Pfizer. Same technology, you know, yeah, basically the same technology. And we should keep in mind, though, that these were approved via an emergency youth authorization, right? So they should be still going through further and ongoing review by the Food and Drug Administration. So keep that in mind. So this was, because I mean, we are in an emergency. Let's be, I mean, this is real. This is like, you know, I don't want to exaggerate this, but there are many of us who felt as a species, our existence was at stake, right? We, like, lots of us are going to die. So, you know, this is not normal times. We're stuck. We might be used to it, but we are still not in normal times.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have, you know, the luxury of choosing Pfizer versus Moderna, that's a luxury. I mean, if you have it, I guess you can make your choice, but that is a luxury.
Agree.
Okay, the next question is two parts, and I'm actually gonna further clarify it. And if I do not, the individual that asked the question, just ask it again. What is being said about donating antibodies or the process around that? And if I'm getting my annual lab blood work, will they automatically test for the antibodies, or is this something I have to ask for?
So great. I'm happy to start, Karen, if you want to add or disagree. So, and like I mentioned, I'm on the board of the New York Blood Center. The Blood Center has a pretty strong convalescent plasma program. So if you are infected and recover, you can then, just like you donate blood, you would donate blood in the same way, and they would get your plasma and isolate your antibodies to the coronavirus, the COVID-19 coronavirus, and then use that and donate that to other individuals. Now, your lab will not typically test for that. And I don't even know if you ask if your lab is specialized enough to test for that, right? So those are the two questions, right? Now, this is not, you know, the LabCorp request down at the, you know, at the end of the corner. Then typically not set up to test for that. So you typically have to go to some specialized labs to get that evaluated. So that, and then there's also a window, right? So there's a window in terms of when you were infected. So people don't want you to still be sick and come in and donate blood and get everybody else sick, right? But it also can't be 9 months later when you're fully recovered and don't have a lot of antibodies sort of in your blood. So there's going to be a window. It is a good thing to do because it has been shown in some studies, once again, not super perfect, but in some studies to be helpful.
I'm gonna concur with all of that. I think it's real important to know too that with the antibody test at specialty labs, there is some false positives. So you just have to be, you know, be concerned about that. But you cannot just ask that they test that because not all labs have the, you know, equipment to do such a test and will not be able to do that.
Next question is, I know we don't know the long-term effects, but are there any short-term side effects?
Well, as we mentioned, the typical short-term effects are that I think, and Karen, correct me if I get the numbers wrong, I think it was about 15% showed arm soreness, 15-20% of that neighborhood. Similar number experienced, you know, maybe a slight fever of 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, maybe a bit of a headache. I mean, basically, it's the symptoms that your body produces by producing those agents that fight viruses. So when you're producing interferon, the whole host of responses to kill viruses, that's your body ramping up. It is not you getting the infection. It is just your body having its natural response. And as I said, when a good friend of mine who's an obstetric nurse got those, she was saying, "Thank God, I know I'm ready now." And my boss was so miserable because when he got the vaccine, maybe in the study, and we don't know even ourselves whether we're on placebo or vaccine, he didn't get a response, and he came home miserable that he wasn't having a fever and pain because now he doesn't know whether he's got it or not. So most people don't have a problem.
And it is required, well, not required, but it is important for you to, if you have any symptoms that are outside of the normal ones, such as he mentioned, which is fatigue, headache, muscle aches, chills, joint pain, and some fever. If you have anything outside of that, just make sure that your healthcare provider know, because they are documenting what those are.
We have another question that says that they've received their first shot last week, and they are still feeling fatigue a week later. Should they be concerned?
So
Okay.
after, now when you say fatigue, like how fatigued you can't, well, you know, you can't lift your arm, you can't eat. I mean, how fatigued are you?
That individual can just type a response in the chat, and then we can go back to that question.
Okay.
Next is it a good idea to take probiotics for your gut health to prevent COVID-19?
I mean, I'll let Owen or Eric go in there. I've done a lot of research on probiotics. That's why when I saw that one, there's trillion microbiome type of within the body. And so when you take a probiotic, depending on how many or which ones they have in there, you don't even know if that probiotic is going to be able to reach or hit the same bacteria that is in the study, that was in the gut. But specifically for COVID, I have seen no data for that and how it would help in any way. But just understanding the difference with microbiomes and the probiotics and its ability to actually impact the gut health.
I'll basically second that. I mean, I'm not being dismissive, because actually I almost considered working for a company trying to work in this space. But the bottom line is that there is no data to date that outside of some very specialized problems, if you have C. difficile colitis, then perhaps you've heard about people who have gotten treatment with that. And yes, the treatment currently is that you basically take somebody else's stool and give it to you. Outside of those narrow areas where things have been shown to really be effective, we really haven't been able to show a strong positive effect. And that's the reason why the government forced Yoplait to stop saying that their yogurt cultures were effective, because they had no data. I'm hoping one day we will have some data on a microbiome preparation that will make you feel better. I'm a strong believer that one day we're going to get there. We ain't there yet.
So a follow-up to that question was the symptoms are very sleepy and drained in the middle of the day, even in the morning.
So a week is sort of that tipping point, right? And I'm not an infectious disease doc, so so I'm not sure, right? Now, there's a lot else going on. We're still in flu season, right? So there could be other stuff going on. We're still in flu season. You could have something else going on that's not a function of the vaccine. That's the challenge, right? So are your symptoms due to the vaccine or other things that might you might have a cold? And this is where it's important to talk to your doctor, because you can go through your history with your doctor, right? Because if you're someone that, every now and again, in the wintertime, this happens to me, there's going to be a different response versus, yeah, I've been healthy as a horse for the 40 years of my life, and I just took this dang vaccine 7 days ago. Now I'm jacked up, right? That's a different thing. That's a conversation for your clinician. Going to have a better sense of your history.
So throughout the discussion, you guys have been saying that minor side effects are expected. If you don't get any side effects after getting the vaccine, does that mean it's not effective?
No, and I'm actually a perfect case for that one. So although I don't know whether I got the COVID vaccine, the following month after that one, I went ahead for the protocol and I got the flu vaccine, and I was unhappy that I didn't feel anything there either. I'm just basically one of those people who just basically doesn't feel much. I've been getting flu vaccines for the past 10 years and I never feel anything, but I also seem to be doing better in the winter. So to our point, maybe only 10 to 15% of people actually get any symptoms. Most people don't feel anything and they still develop the antibodies. So no, don't worry.
Should there be a concern with getting the vaccine if you have pre-existing conditions such as asthma, shellfish allergies, etc.?
So it'd be the same answer in terms of your experience with other vaccines. So if typically you've been fine with other vaccines, you should be fine with COVID. There are, and then it's also, like I said earlier, you have to manage the risk. What is my risk of, if I'm out there working at, our local supermarket is Safeway every day, and my asthma is fine, how do I balance that, right? So, but generally, if you typically been fine with vaccines generally, you should be fine with, there's nothing different about, or nothing terribly different about the COVID vaccine administration that is different. Now, actually, there are some people that argue that the COVID stuff is safer because it's not made from eggs.
Right.
So if you have allergies to eggs, the two COVID vaccines on the market are not produced that way. So it in fact could theoretically be safer than other vaccines.
I'll second that.
The next question is, I know individuals who tested positive with no symptoms. How do we know if you've had a false positive?
Well, there you got one. You get a repeat test, right? That comes up negative. Then you're like, well, what do I got? One positive, what negative? What do I do now? Right? You're kind of like in no man's land or no woman's land. And then you also, so that's real. And then you could actually get an antibody test. So get either a PCR or an antibody test. So that is how you would confirm whether or not you have a false positive.
Correct.
Is there a time limit between the first test and the second test if you feel you have a false positive?
That I don't know.
I also do not know. There are also, part of the challenge also is that, there are different manufacturers. It's not like there's only one test.
Exactly.
So short answer is I don't know. I do know that there are different manufacturers that each of them have different tolerances as to what the false positive rates are. I would, again, in this particular case, I'll look up what I can find, but I would speak to your doctor, basically, just follow up.
I guess the rule of the thumb is if you feel that you've been exposed to COVID and you are symptomatic, if you're symptomatic or not, and you really want to get tested, especially if you have other comorbidities or other health conditions, as Owen has said, you want to make sure that you can confirm that if you have COVID or not, so that you can isolate yourself from others or quarantine yourself from others so that you do not infect your family members. And then more importantly, so that you can monitor yourself so that as your symptoms change, you can inform your physician. That's the most important piece. I think Owen talked about, the going on the ventilator. I think that, Eric, one of the things that you mentioned earlier, you were talking about, you were answering a question about people say, well, do Blacks, why we have more mortalities or whatever to COVID? One of the things that we want to think about is going on that ventilator is not an easy thing. And unfortunately, if you have other health conditions, it's coming off that ventilator is really hard. So your body, unfortunately, not everybody's body is able to recover from being on a ventilator. That's why that's, not something you want to go on. It's not an easy thing. So that's why it's like you want to prevent that from happening or being able to get yourself to that situation, which is what the vaccine will help you do. So even if you do get COVID, it can potentially minimize the severity of the COVID symptoms so that you don't have to be one that needs to be able to be hospitalized, go on the ventilator or any of those types of situations.
I think, Ken, that's one of the most important aspects. And what we found was that the beginning of this pandemic back in February, March, we were still learning. We were tending to be a little bit eager to put people on the vents. We thought we were resting their lungs. And we found that, no, as you said, coming off the ventilator, it can be very, very hard. But the people who are more likely to get on it are those who already have other comorbidities. So take care of yourself, eat a good diet, don't go crazy with the vitamins, but just take care of yourself, wear the mask, and speak to your doctor if most people will do just fine. But if you're not one of those people who's doing just fine, speak to your doctor so you can follow up.
Can the COVID vaccine actually give you COVID? And what is actually in the vaccine?
Oh, okay, I guess I do mechanism. No, I pointed out early on. No, I want you to understand, you are not getting COVID. This is a bit of message from the COVID virus that will help it make some of the protein the virus would have made. And all we're doing is basically convincing your body to please make a little bit of this cap protein that the virus uses to be able to attach to your cells, not the rest of the virus, all the machinery that teaches it how to be able to take over your cells, how to reproduce itself. None of that's there. You're just putting a little bit of message in there so that your body produces a bit of protein that looks a little bit like the outside of the virus, like a hollow shell, nothing else. You're not getting the virus. What your body then does, if you're one of those people that then gets maybe a little bit of fever or a little bit of a sore arm, your body is simply going through the motions of producing the T cells that say, what is that? I don't recognize that. That's not normally part of me. You're then making a little bit of interferon. Interferon is one of those signals that says, let's jack up the temperature a little bit. Let's recruit other cells to be able to kill this thing. So for a couple of days, maybe you feel a little bit stiff over there, but you're not getting an infection.
Now we're hearing that we should wear multiple masks. One, what do you think about that recommendation? And two, if you get the vaccine, do you not have to wear multiple masks?
So the multiple masks, so there's a mask, so a surgical, there are different types of masks, right? I wear, when I go out, I wear a, and I don't own stock in Costco, but I bought a bunch of masks at Costco, right? And I bought some on Amazon. The Amazon ones were a little suspect, but the Costco ones are 3 layers of material. And at the end of this, the reason you have a mask is because the virus particle is a certain size, and if it goes into the mask, it gets caught by the fibers and doesn't go into your mouth and your lungs. That's the basic idea of a mask, right? So the mask has to be enough in terms of quality where it can catch those small virus particles. And so you wear 1, 2, or 3 because your mask isn't that high quality and you're trying to catch more of the virus particle, right? I go out, I wear 1 mask. There is this recommendation you've heard, wear 2. I haven't heard wear 3. Theoretically, that can increase, the coverage. I imagine it's going to be hard to breathe. I don't know if you can actually go out and breathe with 3 masks on. But 1 high quality mask should be okay. If you feel more comfortable wearing 2, and you can breathe and be fine, you should be okay. You'll be okay. But like I said, it really is a function of the quality of the masks and whether or not there's enough fiber and material in there to catch the small virus particles.
And Owen, you just want to kind of remind too that it's not just the mask, it's all of the social distancing things that we need to do, because the mask is one piece of the factor. We need to continue to make sure that we're washing our hands and that we're, keeping, distance from those who are not in our home environment, and minimize exposure as much as possible. I think that's probably even more telling and healthy. Not more, but it's just important as wearing the mask. Because I've known people to say, oh, I've done all this, I wore this mask, and I got COVID. How did that happen? Because there was some other part of that process that was not kept, that provided that exposure.
And I think the other part of the question was, if I get the vaccine, should I not wear a mask? And the answer to that is no, you should wear a mask, even if you do get the vaccine, for 2 reasons. One, the vaccine isn't fully effective, right? So if you're in that 5%, you still want to protect yourself. And then 2, you're protecting others, right? So there's the biggest unknown about the vaccines is whether or not it prevents transmission. So your ability to transfer to other people, right? So in your household or when you're out, you still want to wear that mask for those 2 reasons.
That consists to basically be at the safety belt in your car. If I have a safety belt, can I drive around at 95 miles an hour on the highway? No, please follow the safety rules on the highway. The safety belt is for additional safety.
And Karen is spot on. This stuff seems simple, but hand washing, being physically distant, not having 20 people that, stop going to the clubs. Right. And well, this is the church group, so I know y'all don't go to the club, but for those, for those other folks, those people backsliding, they probably at the club on Friday night. We don't want to do that, right? So we're still in this situation. I know, like, just because we're used to it and we've gotten accustomed to it doesn't mean we're out of the woods at all.
If you've previously had COVID, can you get it again? And can you get COVID after getting the vaccine?
Well, by definition, if a vaccine is 95 to 97% effective, it still means that obviously, some 3% of people, despite having gotten the vaccine, still had symptoms. Also, let me also emphasize, when we say effective, we are talking about effective in preventing you from having severe symptoms. We're not measuring whether the vaccine can completely 100% absolutely stop you from getting the virus. This is designed to prevent you from being hospitalized and having bad outcomes. But as the numbers show, still, even if you get the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine, compared to people who didn't have the vaccine, some still got an infection. So that's why Karen is emphasizing, even after you get the vaccine, don't be silly, continue hand washing, continue the social distancing, and continue to do logical things like wearing the mask. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you. If you catch me out here in Valley Forge Park, my general expectation is that since the virus is not some kind of evil humor that's chasing me around the park, you're not gonna see me with my mask on. But when I end up getting close to people, my mask goes on.
And I'm one of those folks that I do my little run, my hike, I have my mask on all the time. And I look at Eric, I'm thinking, dude, put your mask on. I'm about to come near you.
The mask is always with me, Owen, don't worry. So as soon as I see you showing up, the mask goes on.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna make one really quick comment. I mean, there was one piece of, one more elephant in the room that at least my relatives had raised. I don't know if it's relevant to people here, but I just want to speak to it. My relatives said, but well, how do I know I can really trust your companies? Because, you know, we had the problem in the past of Tuskegee. And I just want to emphasize that it was a shameful event in the past, but let's characterize what it was. That was a clinical study that asked what would happen if we did not give good drugs to Black people. We are now talking about drugs, good drugs that are being given to people in general. And the last thing I'd want to see happen to our community is for us to take ourselves out of the opportunity of getting good drugs because 80 years ago, someone said, what would happen if we didn't give good drugs to Black people? So there's a very different kind of context of what happened back then. You have an opportunity now to be able to get the same therapy that Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and anyone else who's wealthy can possibly get. This is an amazing opportunity over here. So I'm not going to tell you what you should do, but it's a different situation than what happened back in the day.
Aaliyah, maybe one more question.
How long does the virus live on surfaces?
Good question. So I heard Anthony Fauci speak to this. So here's the thing. There's how long it can live and how long you should care about how long it lives. And that's what I mean by that. It is possible using the techniques that we have nowadays, because when we talk about using things like PCR that Owen talked about, this is a very high-tech technique that did not exist when I was in college. It is possible to pick up, you know, vanishingly small amounts of virus. And so, yes, if you end up talking about putting virus on a plastic surface, not in the sun, so it's not getting hit by UV radiation, it is possible, as Anthony Fauci pointed out, for you to be able, with this technique, to be able to see on 25 cycles of PCR that, yes, there's still virus there. That virus is not infecting anybody. As someone, I think it was Owen, pointed out, this is a pulmonary virus. So, I mean, basically, for all intents and purposes, if you're doing logical things like wiping things down, wearing that mask, waving at me when you see me in the park, so I get my mask on, you will be absolutely fine. But yes, it is true that if you end up looking at these laboratory techniques, we can measure single copy amounts of virus. That is not what's going to kill you.
And when you talk about surfaces, I think we all can appreciate the factor of having children, adult children, that like to not maybe follow the rules. I know my youngest is 20, and yes, when I started young, no, I'm just joking. God. I really didn't. But it's getting them to understand that our health, being a different generation, it's very important for them to understand that they need to practice these types of measures, because they're the ones that can bring it home to the older generations, to grandmothers, to aunts, to uncles, to mothers and fathers. I have seen it. I have known of 2 people to be buried because a younger family member brought it home to an older family member
Yeah.
that had more health conditions. So while you might be learning this, it's very important that you teach these measures and remind these measures of to your family members, because again, you know, it takes a village for us to support one another on this process. So if I don't leave with nothing else, I leave with that very important message, having known two people to be buried because of a family member, a son, and one I think was a daughter or niece that brought, you know, the virus home.
I was supposed to see my son this weekend, Karen, and he called me and said, well, Dad, by the way, I met somebody 2 days ago who said their son had COVID. So I don't know if I'm sick, but maybe you don't want to come. So we have to also make good choices. And, you know, we don't want to be separated from our families, but you don't want to give your kids a good excuse for boomer remover.
Very good. We could go on for days. I'm sure there will be a lot of additional questions that would come about. I'm hoping that everyone on this call realized that I was very fortunate to bring a superstar panelist on tonight and to answer some of your questions and everything else. Also, I want to make sure that my members of my church had concerns, but also the reason why I put this together, because my almost 80-year-old sister had concerns about taking this as well. So we want to give Reverend Givens some time to close this out for us.
Good evening to all of you. And I was informed that my time is very, very limited, and I'll be very brief. Most of all, I give God the praise. And on behalf of the Shiloh A.M.E. Zion Church family, we want to express our sincere appreciation to our panelists, to Sister Karen and Brother Owen, Brother Eric. Thank you very much for that world of knowledge and information. God bless you. I want to give a shout out to Brother Quincy and Brother Steve, and Dr. Miller and Reverend Miller and Aaliyah Fields for helping putting us together, this program together, and to express our appreciation to all of our listeners. I saw the numbers. We had 101 at one point listening in for this valuable information. God bless all of you. God bless our panelists. Hang in there, hang in the field. We need you out there. God bless you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Have a blessed night.
Take care all. Thank you very much for your time.